last week we left off really with the appearance of Jesus. As I said, if you missed all the time we were at the church and just been catching when we've been out in the backyard services, you got kind of the start, the introduction. Now you're getting more of the conclusion of the book of Revelation, but which means you got to skip all the judgments and you got right to the good stuff. So last week we were looking really at the description that was given of Jesus as he appeared, and nothing about the description was random. It all had a purpose and a meaning, and a lot of it was in direct contrast to the false Christ, the one who was also on a white horse, the one who spoke lies and deception, and that's how he conquered. But Jesus comes, and he's the true King of Kings. He's the true Lord of Lords. He's got his own name that nobody else knows, so it's secret to him. He's the one who's paid the price. He's going to tread the winepress by himself, and he speaks only the truth. And when he judges, he will judge, and he will make war in righteousness, all contrary to the false beast who has gathered his armies to meet Christ. And so now we left off that. Now we're just going to really kind of get into, I want to say the battle, but it's not even really a battle. This is one of the things that's kind of unique to it. The Antichrist and the false prophet and the dragon have gathered their forces to make war against the Lamb, but the scriptures don't even depict a battle here. And as we're going to see, the Lamb just shows up and that's it. Nothing else is described. It's just, he's there and it's over. So as we do that, let's go to Revelation 19, starting at verse 17. And we'll go to 21. It says, "Then I saw an angel standing in the sun, and he cried with a loud voice, saying to all the birds that fly in the midst of heaven, Come and gather together for the supper of the great God, that you may eat the flesh of kings, and the flesh of captains, the flesh of mighty men, the flesh of horses, and those who sit on them, and the flesh of all people, free and slave, both small and great. And I saw the beast, the kings of the earth, and their armies gathered together to make war against him who sat on the horse, and against his army. Then the beast was captured, and with him the false prophet, who worked signs in his presence, by which he deceived those who received the mark of the beast, and those who worshipped his image. These two were cast alive into the lake of fire, burning with brimstone. And the rest were killed with the sword which proceeded from the mouth of him who sat on the horse, and all the birds were filled with their flesh." All right, we're going to pause there. As I said, this isn't really a battle. It's just like they're gathered and that's it. And if you want, the commanders were captured and the rest were killed instantly. And so, but there's still stuff to unpack here. We're going to unpack it a little bit. So it starts here. It's like, he says, "Then I looked and I saw an angel standing in the sun." Now, this is kind of awkward. He probably wasn't, don't take that absolutely literal. Saying, oh, look, in the middle of the sun, he went to the sun and he's standing in the sun. More than likely what it is, when John looked, what does he see? He sees the angel standing in front of the sun. So from any perspective, we would say he's standing in the sun. He's standing in the light. But there's something unique about this. If you've ever had something, except for like the moon, that we had the solar eclipse, go in front of the sun as you're trying to follow it, you probably lose it. Now think about it. If you've been tracking a plane that's flying across and it goes across where the sun is, you can't see it. But this angel, the glory that the angel has about him, is so powerful that it's actually dimming the sun. In other words, it's outshining the sun in that aspect. And so he can see him. It's one of those strange things. So the splendor of the angel is even visible in that aspect, that John can make out exactly what it is and what is speaking. And the angel makes a declaration here. Now, again, this isn't random. It's not just him making something just out there. As we've gone through Revelation, I say this every time, it almost completely fulfills the Old Testament. Almost every imagery that is chosen comes from the Old Testament. And this is no exception. Even his very words are. And one of the things as I went through the Gospels, it was John the Baptist. When he was challenged, like, well, are you the Christ? He's like, no. Well, are you the prophet? No. And then it's like, well, who are you? And it describes, and he answered in the words of Isaiah. So he's quoting the scriptures like, I know what I'm saying. I am the voice of him crying in the wilderness. Make way the straight of the Lord, the path of the Lord. And here you've got an angel calling out. It isn't random. This is a direct reference to Ezekiel, the prophet Ezekiel. It's Ezekiel 39:17. I'm going to go all the way back to the Old Testament. Ezekiel 39. Oops, went too far out. There's Daniel. And Ezekiel 39. Now, to understand Ezekiel 39, it's all about this nation and peoples that's called Gog. Now, in modern culture, they always like to try to figure out who's Gog, who's Magog, and all that. But in this one, it's referring to something to come, that Gog and its allies are going to attack Israel, and Gog itself will be destroyed. And it's going to be the Lord who does it. And if you look, it comes out and says, and as for you, son of man, thus says the Lord God, speak to every sort of bird and to every beast of the field. Assemble yourselves and come, gather together from all sides to my sacrificial meal, which I am sacrificing for you. A great sacrificial meal on the mountains of Israel, that you may eat flesh and drink blood. You shall eat the flesh of the mighty, drink the blood of princes of the earth, of rams and lambs, of goats and bulls, all of them fatlings of Bashan. You shall eat fat till you are full, and drink blood till you are drunk, at my sacrificial meal which I am sacrificing for you. You shall be filled at my table with horses and riders, with mighty men, and with all the men of war, says the Lord. In other words, it's just a victory ideal. But the victory is so total that when God shows up, it's like, it's going to be enough that all the birds are going to be able to gorge themselves. And so the imagery there is not really supposed to conjure up the things like, oh, what a grotesque sight, or that kind of deal. The idea is an absolute, total victory. It's a total slaughter. And as I said, in the Ezekiel passage, it was talking about Gog, and Gog was coming, and it was the Lord who's going to deliver. And no matter how big the opposing army is, the Lord is victorious. And so what, even in Revelation, as it picks this up, it's the exact same imagery. That total victory. That all these people who've gathered, the dragon who is so powerful, this beast from the sea, which is his champion, that has 10 horns and crowns, and is false prophet, and all the kings of the earth that have come, they're nothing before the true King of Kings. That the battle is just simply the angel saying, come, this is going to be a great slaughter. But it's not going to be the way that the world thinks it's going to go. The Antichrist is gathering his forces here, thinking he's going to have victory, or final victory over the people of God, over the Lamb who's going to come. And yet the angel makes the declaration here, birds, come, you're about to have your fill. And so this is what it is. And it's this contrast between the two things. That this mighty army is never going to stand. And so no matter how strong it appears, no matter how much wickedness was done, no matter what their plans are, God's victory is already assured. And so the bird's coming. And as I said, as you look at this, there's not even a battle. It's literally come and eat. And then it just says, John looks. It says, I see the beasts, the kings of the earth, the armies gathered together to make war with him who sat on the horse and against his army. That's what it says. John says, I look, and I look and I see the angel. He makes this declaration. I then turn and look, and I see the vast army. And then the next thing he says is, then the beast was captured. That's it. It just comes right down. The beast was captured, and with him the false prophet. who worked signs in the presence by which he deceived everybody. And so when you really look, this shows the true power of Christ. Now, why would that be so comforting? You can't ignore what has already come in the book of Revelation. When it talked about the Antichrist and the beast, is how Revelation calls him, it says, from the earthly perspective, he had power to make war against the saints and to conquer them. And there's always a saying that the beast is going to be very powerful. Anybody who does not worship the beast and take his mark, they can't buy or sell. They're going to be put to death if he gets a hold of them. And it's seeming that his prophet, his false prophet, which is also called the beast of the land, he's also able to do great miracles. He's able to call down fire from heaven and deceive many. And you look and you're like, man, this is so powerful. They have such victory. Yet, before the Lamb, that's not where the victory is. The victory is in Christ. And so throughout it, every time we ran into that idea in Revelation where the beast has got this power, who can make war against him, who can stand, there's always a comforting voice right next to it. In Revelation 6, when we saw it, it's like the wrath of the Lamb has come, who can stand? You get the answer in Revelation 7, where it was all about those who are sealed by Christ from every tribe, nation, tongue, and language. They're rescued. They can stand. Here comes the beast. Who can make war at him? And John says, I turned and looked, and these are the ones who had victory over the beast, because they did not love their own life, even to the point of death. Who are they? They're the ones who proclaimed Christ and washed their robes in the blood of the Lamb. That they have the victory. And so here you see that the army of Christ comes against this army who's said they're going to have the victory, and the battle's over before it even begins. And the two champions of it, the beast from the sea and the false prophet, they're captured. They're not killed here. They're captured, and they're the first that are thrown directly into the lake of fire. That's what it says. It says they came who received the mark of the beast, those who worshipped the image, these two were cast alive into the lake of fire burning with brimstone. Now, this is kind of an interesting detail, because I think we have to be careful we don't get our theology from culture. What we call the lake of burning fire, we call actually hell. And what happens is we often mix languages together. We will call Hades and hell, we will intermingle them. But it's not the same place. Hades and Sheol are the same place. Sheol is just the Hebrew understanding of the land of the dead. Hades is the Greek name for the land of the dead. In fact, when Jesus told about the rich man and Lazarus, this is what he's referring to, the land of the dead. And he says that Lazarus went to Abraham's bosom, or Abraham's side. He went to the place of rest for now. That was a bug. And the rich man, he went to the place of torment. In Greek, that would be Tartarus, or what we would call the punishment side of Hades. But then there's this other place, which is the lake of fire, which is hell. And up to this point, there's nobody in it. The first ones who are cast in are the Antichrist and his false prophet. Now, what about everybody else? Well, when we get to the end of Revelation, you'll see, and then the dead gave up all that was in them. And let me show you. It's in chapter 20 here. Let's jump. I'm going to jump to the end here just a bit, just to show you what I'm saying. It says, and the dead were judged. This is verse 12, halfway through. And the dead were judged according to their works by the things which are written in the books. The sea gave up the dead who were in it, and death and Hades delivered up the dead who were in them. And they were judged, each one according to his works. Then death and Hades were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. And anyone not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. This is the resurrection of the wicked. So in other words, there's nobody in the lake of fire right yet. It is a place that is to come. And so the first two to go in there are the beast and the prophet. And there's probably a really good reason for this, because there's a third one who will end up in there. And it's going to be the dragon. But he gets 1,000 years to think about it. And we'll get to that. Because although the beast and the false prophet are thrown in there, the dragon gets tied up and thrown into a different pit, a holding cell that God keeps. And we actually covered that. You'd have to remember all the way back to the fifth trumpet. It says an angel came with a key to the abyss, and he opened it. And in there were kept a demonic locust horde, which was reserved for that time. And when it was opened, it's great smoke came out. It's the same pit that the dragon's going to be thrown into for 1,000 years, where he's basically, it's the ultimate punishment. Go to your room and think about what you did. Because when he gets out, he's only out for a very short time, and his fate is the lake of fire. And so the first thing, the punishment there, yes, it's on the false prophet, yes, it's on the beast, but it's also the dragon, because these are his two champions. These are his false Christ, his false prophet, and so he's being stripped of everything. And these two bypass every other judgment. In other words, when everybody else, the resurrection of the wicked happens, they get the book of life is open, the books of the dead are open. They don't even get that. They just go, hup, and you're done. That's it. And when it comes to everybody else, this is of his army, the rest were killed with the sword, which proceeds from the mouth of him who sat on the horse, and all the birds were filled with their flesh. So which means the rest of the army, when they were killed, where did they go? To the land of the dead, for now. But what's note here is, notice John makes it clear that it was not the armies of heaven that were victorious. It's not, in this case, there's debate over what the armies of heaven are. Are they angels that are coming with them, or are these the martyred saints whom the beast is martyred during this time? The victory is solely and entirely through Christ. It is his victory. And that's one thing that is clear always through the scripture, that every single victory that is had is through Christ and Christ alone. We've done nothing. We didn't defeat sin. We didn't defeat death. We didn't overcome. It was Christ who had the victory, and the victory alone. And so when it comes down to it, he's the one who gets the glory. He's the one who gets the honor. He's the one who has the name above every name. And he's the one which every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, because the victory is his. Now, does that mean the saints get nothing? Well, no, because what does it say? We get the victory, but we should never be so arrogant to think, you know what, I've earned it. No, we get it only because of the grace and mercy of Jesus. And unfortunately, I think that's one of the traps that we can always fall into, is that when we've been handed something and it's been gifted to us, we can fall into this entitlement attitude where I deserve more. Give me more. I deserve this. And I think that shows up even in the life of the church. This is a little bit of side of Revelation, though, where people now think, well, God has to make me healthy. God has to make me wealthy. God has to give me this blessing. God has to give me that blessing. God has to this. And the answer is no, he doesn't. God didn't even have to give us forgiveness. God didn't even have to give us a way out. Yet in his infinite mercy, he chose to. In his grace, he extended it to us. And therefore, if the only thing we ever received from God is his grace, then that has already been more than enough. Because that's all we need, and that's more than we ever deserved. And so even when it comes to the victory through it all. Yes, the saints are striving to persevere. Yes, the saints are striving to survive it all. But in the end, the victory is Christ and Christ alone. And that's who gets the glory. And so when they ask the question, who is like the beast and who can make war against him? Yeah, as strong as he seems, he is nothing compared to the one who sits on the horse. His victory is total and assured, and he defeats them all by himself. And how does he do it? Well, it says, by the sword which proceeds from his mouth. Now, unless you're imagining some kind of image where he physically spits out a sword, the idea here is that the victory, he doesn't even break a sweat. He just speaks, and it happens. And that shouldn't be a surprise. How were the heavens created? By his word. And so it is nothing for him to do this. When you think, when Jesus rose Lazarus, Jesus didn't walk into the tomb. He didn't go in and breathe. He just stood outside the tomb where everybody could hear him and went, Lazarus, come out. And what happened? The Lazarus got up and walked out. Just his speaking has the power. And so this whole great conflict is wrapped up in a mere moment from the words of Christ. And he has the victory. And so it brings us to the end of what we'd classify as the tribulation. It's been a kind of a journey. It took us, well, a while. But the story's not done. You're like, wait a minute, we got a couple of chapters left. There's more to come. Because then it says, the victory is won. The dragon's still there. It says, then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, having the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. And he laid hold of the dragon, that serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. And he cast him into the bottomless pit and shut him up and set a seal on him, so that he should deceive the nations no more till the 1,000 years were finished. But after these things, he will be released for a little while. Now, this gets interesting here, because this is one of the debated passages of Revelation. What exactly does this mean? That he's bound for 1,000 years. There's things in Revelation that, hey, we don't have to argue about. If you remember Revelation 12, when it talked about, it said, I looked, and I saw a great woman. She was crowned with 12 stars, and she gave birth to a male child, and the dragon sought to consume her. I said, as we unpack this, we got to start figuring out, what does all this imagery mean? And it's like, okay, so we can start with the easy imagery, the dragon. Well, the dragon is that serpent of old, it tells us. And then it's like, well, then the child, well, who's the child? But then it says, well, he will rule the nations with an iron rod. So we're like, okay, that makes it easy enough. There's only one who fits that. There's only one who's going to do that. Well, that makes it Jesus. And then we ran into, well, then who's the woman? And that became a little more complex, because it fits a couple of different paradigms. In this case, this is what happens. Depending on what we come to the text with, they're going to determine, what is this 1,000 years? Because there's ones that if they come, it's like, well, this is kind of symbolic, and we're currently in this 1,000 years. That when Christ died and rose again, well, the dragon lost his powers, so essentially he's bound. And so, obviously, 1,000 years here does not mean 1,000 years. It simply means a period of time, an extended period of time. And they said, well, that means it goes from Christ's resurrection until his return. That's what it means, kind of thing. And so, when you look at it, it's like, so the dragon is not deceiving anybody right now, and this is just natural human wickedness. Now, there's half-truth there, but you're going to run into the problem that this doesn't seem to indicate that it's symbolic. And what I mean by that is, more than once, when it talks about the martyrs, and it talks about they reigned and they lived with and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. And then it says, but the rest of the dead did not live again until 1,000 years were up. And so when you start to look at this, there seems to be more of an indication that this actually is a time frame. Because at the end of it says, now when the 1,000 years have expired. It's a real awkward way if you continually want to say, oh, this 1,000 years just means an extended period of time. The reason I say this doesn't fit is because when was this battle when Christ came on a white horse and slaughtered everybody? You're kind of stuck. There's no event in history that fits that description. So you'd have to make this all symbolic. And so you run into the problems. And so when it looks at this again, and one of the things I often do is when I've studied Revelation and I study the scriptures, I like to go back to as close to those who lived during that time as possible when it was written. And the reason I do that is because I want to see how did they understand it. And what can happen is we can run into a logical fallacy here where we think newer is better. And it is a logical fallacy where we think just because it's new, it's automatically better. Now, that can work some when it comes to like certain archaeological discoveries. When we're studying things like, oh, this new archaeology, this discovery sheds better light on what life was like then. But this doesn't work when it comes to ancient texts. And the reason being is because words have meaning. And yes, the meaning of words changes. And so we want to look at that time frame. How did people of that time understand those words? I'd love to give an example of growing up. That if I said, okay, after church, we're going to go up the road and we're going to go get a fix. You stop and you think about that. You're like, okay, we're going to get a needle, we're going to get some tubing, we're going to get a fix. The community that we lived in, that's what they called a poutine. And there was a store up the road where you could buy a large poutine that came actually in like 2 containers. That's how large it was. And you could feed everybody. And so they're saying, hey, let's go after church, let's go get a fix. They're saying, hey, let's go and let's order French fries with gravy and cheese. And so you wouldn't go, oh, that whole village must be drug addicts. No, you'd go, okay, how did they understand the term? How did they use it? And so that's what I like to do with the book of Revelation. So this idea that this time period represents a symbolic time frame, well, that didn't even arise until like 350 AD and on. So I go before that, and during that time, before that, so we're talking like Ignatius and that time, they understood it as a literal 1,000-year reign, where the dragon will be bound, he'll be thrown into the pit, and Christ will rule for 1,000 years. A literal kingdom. And when I look at the text straightforward, I don't see any reason for that not to be the case. And I think it fits. And as I said, you've got this pit that God has, and it's not the only time that it's mentioned. You get things like in the book of Jude where it says that angels have been bound until the time has come. And you've got even a legion who's begging Jesus, like, don't throw us out, don't throw us into the abyss. And so I think it's one of those things we don't like to think about, that God would have a holding cell. But he seems to. That where not every demon and every angel who rebelled against him in the Great Rebellion was left to roam. It seems like the worst of them were actually bound up until the time of the end. And we see that in a couple of places where it'll say, it's like, and these ones were kept until the time. And so with the pit opened, the dragon is now thrown in. He's bound and he's thrown in, and there he'll remain. So his power is no longer there for to be able to deceive the nations. And it sets up an unprecedented time where Christ is reigning, a time of peace, but there's still stuff going on. And so when we look, and unfortunately, in the book of Revelation, we're not given a full view of this 1,000-year frame. In fact, if you look at it, what it actually says, it says, "And I saw thrones, and they sat on them. And judgment was committed to them. Then I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for their witness to Jesus." Witness to Jesus and the word of God, who had not worshipped the beast, nor his image, or received his mark, and on their foreheads or on their hands. And they lived and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years, but the rest of dead did not live again until the 1,000 years were finished. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is he who has part in the first resurrection. Over such the second death has no power, but they shall be priests of God and of Christ, and shall reign with him 1,000 years. And then now when the 1,000 years have expired, we're like, wait a minute, where's the rest of the details? I want to know about the 1,000 years. And this leaves us some questions. What's the point? Why not just fix it right then and there? He's got the Antichrist is beaten, the false prophet is beaten, his armies are beaten, the dragon is subdued. Why not just take the dragon and throw him in with the others? Why seal him away? Why let him back out? What's the point of all this? You ever stopped and asked yourself that question? Because they're important questions to ask. To say, what's going on here? Now, I'm not saying we will always have all the answers, but there are answers to these questions. Not everything is written in the book of Revelation. As I've noted numerous times, you've got to look at all the scriptures that are there. Do you remember, even when I told you the book of Daniel, Daniel, as we studied it, jumped in history a lot. Sometimes it was talking specifically about the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, Antiochus IV, talking about the rise of the Greek Empire, the Medo-Persian Empire. It talks about those, and then all of a sudden it'll jump all the way to the end. And sometimes you got to go, well, who's he talking about? Because there's times he's like, well, I'm talking about Antiochus here. Then all of a sudden he's like, no, now I'm talking about the one who's going to come, the one who's going to gather his armies at the plains of Megiddo. And he's going to be defeated. And so Daniel kind of goes, Antiochus, 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 and then jumps to the end, skipping all of Revelation and not really describing what happens in that last week. Now, Revelation kind of does the same thing here. It's like, hey, look, here's the millennial reign. Just so you know, the only thing you need to know is that those who had been martyred, that the beast had killed, well, guess what's happened to them that he thought he killed? They're now going to reign with Christ 1,000 years. But then you're under the question, who are they reigning over? What does the earth look like? Because this isn't the renewal of earth yet. It's not the new heaven and the new earth. It's still the old heavens and the old earth. It's still got the effects of things. So what exactly is going on? And one of the things that I challenge on, and I was working on this even this afternoon, just trying to make sense of this, is some would argue that everybody who enters into this time frame is a believer in Christ. I don't think so. It doesn't say that Christ has removed everybody. It says he defeated the army. So unless you want to make the assumption that absolutely everybody that took the mark of the beast is in that army, then there's people who survive. You got to remember, during that time frame, that you're still going to have young people. You're going to have children. You're going to have infants that are going to grow up. And during that time frame, I think you're going to have, all the believers will enter into it, but I think you're going to have people who survived that time frame, who didn't die in the judgments. Not everybody dies in the judgments. something like 75% will. You got about a quarter of the earth's population left, and a lot of the believers have been martyred for the gospel. You still got a nice little chunk. And as we unpack the millennial, as you understand that, and we're going to unpack it in the coming weeks, you're going to have things like they're going to be made to come to Jerusalem to offer sacrifices. If they don't come, well, then there's going to be no rain on their land. Well, you tell me, what believers aren't going to want to show up? What believer is not going to want to go, hey, wait, Jesus is reigning in Jerusalem? I'm there. If I got a way there, I'm going to do whatever I can to get there. I don't care about anything else. But an unbeliever who's been hostile to Christ the entire time, yeah, they may resist. The scriptures also say that he's going to rule with an iron scepter. Why an iron scepter? Because it means he's going to keep a tight hold. Judgment is going to be there. He's not going to overlook injustices. Now you tell me, which believers are going to suddenly partake in injustices? And then the other argument they try to come back with, they'll say, well, the believers are going to have children, and so perhaps the children of believers who are at that time, well, they're not going to be believers. It's possible, but I think you're going to run into a problem when it comes to the fact that it says when the dragon's released and he goes out, and he says he goes to the fort, deceiving the nations of the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together, whose number is as the sand of the sea. You're telling me that you'd almost have to have all the believers' children rebel against Christ. And I don't think that's going to happen. But it makes more sense if unbelievers have entered into that time frame as well. Now, make no mistake, they will never enter into the eternal kingdom. Only the righteous enter the eternal kingdom. Neither the corrupt cannot inherit incorruption. And so this is still during the time, the millennial section is still on earth, as we would understand it here, and not in the new heavens and the new earth. Now, next week, we'll come back and I'm going to unpack, we're not going to spend so much time in Revelation, but we're going to unpack the millennial. What is it all about? What's the purpose of it? Why not just take out the dragon? What's life going to be like during there? We don't know everything, but we're given enough through the scriptures that we can kind of piece it together a little bit of what life will kind of be like, but we won't know everything. It's kind of like when people say, well, what's heaven going to be like? Oh, we're going to be sitting around with harps on clouds. Yeah, probably not.
Philadelphia cream cheese.
Yeah, Philadelphia cream cheese. But we can get enough of a picture of the millennial through the scriptures. We'll look at Ezekiel, we'll look at Zechariah, because these gives us pictures of what life is going to be like during that time frame with Jesus on his throne ruling. And it answers why the millennial is necessary.